So what are those alternatives? Well, the best of them is based on a process where we estimate the benchmark rate, right? And then we try to estimate a default premium that we add to the benchmark rate that accounts for the risks that are involved in loaning money to the firm, okay? So this is in the case where we can't observe a price, or we haven't observed a price in a long enough time, and we're uncomfortable with the way that the market has changed since the last price that we observed. And because of that, we're going to try to estimate the yield to maturity on our own. So we look at the benchmark rate. What are we going to use for the benchmark rate? We're going to use the risk-free rate of a similar maturity treasury bond. So or treasury if it's US, a local government bond if it's in a different country other than the US. All right, so if I have a 10-year bond for UPS, I'm going to find a 10-year treasury bond as my benchmark rate. Then I'm going to try to estimate the default premium. And this just says, what's the risk that the company is not going to pay back the loan? Okay, remember, default is a legal term. It means failure to make an interest payment, right, or a promised payment. Then you are legally in default, right? And default can lead to bankruptcy, which is where the firm is shut down, it's unwound, all of its assets are sold off, right? So I'm going to try and say, how likely is it that in the next year the company doesn't pay me back? Or how likely is it that in the next 10 years the company doesn't pay me back, right? And so I can have a few ways to estimate this default premium. And again, there's going to be an easy way and a hard way. The easy way will be that people already do the hard work of estimating the likelihood of default. Right? These people are called credit rating agencies, and they assign a credit rating to firms in the same way that individuals are assigned a credit score. Right? So you have a credit score between 500 and 850. It tells a bank how lendworthy you are, how creditworthy you are. If the bank lends you money, what's the likelihood that you're going to pay it back on time every time? Right? So for a company, we have the same thing. It's sort of a slightly different measure, but it imparts the same level of information. And so if we have a credit rating agency that has evaluated the firm already, then we're in great shape. They have told us this is the riskiness of the firm over a certain period. We can use that to help us interpret the default premium. If a company doesn't have a credit score and their bonds haven't been traded, then we just have less and less information. And so again, we're going to have to try and do it on our own. But every time we got to do more things on our own, we got to make more and more assumptions. And we're going to do it in a place that we're not very comfortable with. I mean, I'm not the expert, or we're not going to be the experts in evaluating this company's credit health, especially if we're doing it from the outside. So if we do the easy way, we got to find the benchmark, and the benchmark is going to be the current rate on the appropriate maturity treasury bond or other local government bond. Okay, so I'm just going to go on Bloomberg. I'm going to go on the Treasury website. You can go on the Treasury website. That's where I got this graph. You can go on the Treasury website. You can look at the current both yield and issuance rate, coupon rate on all the treasuries that are being sold today. All right, so I go find the current rate. These were the current rates in 2015. You can see that they're almost zero in between 1 month and 6 month bonds because the likelihood of default for the U.S. government in the next 6 months is minuscule, but climb up to about 3% for a 30-year bond, and that was in 2015. If you go look at it right now, they're all way lower than that. I think the 30-year is the highest at like 1.4% interest to the U.S. government, and we are close to negative rates in the lower half. I think the Treasury is paying like 2.02% on a 1 month bond right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if we actually saw true negative issuance rates. Yields on Treasuries are almost all negative. I think even the 30-year bond has a negative yield right now, as of like 3 days ago when I looked. Okay, but this is what we're trying to do. We're going to look at say we've got a 10-year bond. We're going to look at the 10-year rate for Treasuries. This is our risk-free benchmark rate. We say, okay, in 2015 it was 2.5%. That's what we're going to use as our benchmark. Now we need to estimate the default premium. This is the likelihood that a company is going to default. We got a lot of things to think about. It's not an easy thing to sort of predict failure. Just like it's not an easy thing to predict anything, but this is a actively studied academic area trying to predict default risk. There's a lot of work going on at the rating agencies, and the rating agencies are Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, right? So all of those rating agencies that are providing credit scores to these companies, or credit ratings to these companies, they're all actively researching the better ways to do it. What is the best prediction of a company that is going to fail? And really, I'd like you guys to think about that. Just think about it, right? If I asked you, what's the best predictor that a company won't make its promised interest payments in the next year? What would it be? Would it be revenue? Would it be the change in revenue from the previous year? Would it be the level of cash that a company has in its bank account? Would it be one of those financial ratios that we talked about in the last chapter, like EBITDA, cash coverage, interest coverage, right? EBITDA over interest, right? Certainly those are all probably correlated with the ability of a company to pay their bills. But what's the best measure? Or is it some combination of all those things? Is there a way that we can come up with a model that says if a company has low cash and revenue has shrunk and its and its interest coverage ratio is bad, and it has X and Y and Z. If we add up all those things together for the company, we have a really good measure, and we can say that the company won't pay its bills, right? And the fact is that we don't. Lots of people, really smart people, are trying to figure this out all the time. And at best, our best models, they predict bankruptcy and failure at like 10% rates. Meaning you get it right 1 in 10 times. And that's pretty dismal, right? But that's predicting the future. If we could do it better, we'd all be millionaires. Or I guess the people who could do it right would be millionaires. The rest of us would still be where we are, right? So how are we going to estimate default risk? We're going to do it with a ton of error. And so because there's a ton of error, the easiest thing to do is appeal to authority. And authority is the credit rating agencies. I can say everyone else will turn to the credit rating agencies as an estimate of default risk. I can do it too, right? And because I can do it that way, then I have a good fallback plan for when my boss says, how did you estimate the default premium? I can say, well, I went and looked at the credit rating supplied from S&P and Moody's, and they had a really good credit rating. They were AAA rated, so that means they're really safe. And I looked at all the other AAA rated bonds, and I took the average of those ratings, and I used that as my default premium. And more or less, that's what we're going to do. Right? So you can see here the standard ratings from S&P and Moody's, all the way from AAA down to CCC, and actually there's another level beneath it labeled junk. And what the ratings do is give us a general measure of the creditworthiness of the company. And particularly here, they give a creditworthiness measure of likelihood of default in the following year. So AAA is the best. This means their capacity to meet their financial commitments is extremely high. They are almost like 99% likely to pay all their bills. Then we go AA, single A, triple B. And these top 4 ratings are called investment grade ratings. These all say that the company is pretty strong and that regardless of what happens in the next year, the ability for these companies to meet their financial commitments is pretty good, right? Now, of course, none of these are really taking into account a crisis like what we're experiencing now or 2008, right? Even in those periods, we probably only had reliance that the AAA ones were going to be survivors. But even now, I mean, depending on how long this crisis goes on and how long businesses and things are shut down, we might see even companies that are rated, pretty highly investment grade start to struggle because they can't do anything when they're not bringing in any revenue if they're all shut down, right? We see there's actually been reports in the Wall Street Journal of pretty major companies not paying their rent because their stores have been shut down by government order. So like Dick's Sporting Goods, like 80% of their locations didn't pay rent this month, and they're saying that there's a major crisis caused them to not fulfill their obligation, and that means they're not technically in default. We're going to see this play out in the legal world and the financial world in weird ways, but already we've seen that like some of these ratings probably weren't very good. In fact, most of them probably aren't very good, and we already knew that from the financial crises that came before. In 2001 and 2008, we saw lots of otherwise well-rated companies crumble under the weight of a financial crisis. So then, the ones underneath that are not investment grade are double B, B, triple C, and then junk, which is basically likelihood of default is 50% or greater, right? And so what we're going to do to estimate a default premium is see what the rating for our company is. Let's say S&P and Moody's have rated UPS AAA, which I think it is. So we say, okay, AAA, that means they're extremely likely to meet their financial commitments. That means they have low risk, so we're gonna add only a small default premium. But how do we estimate the default premium? We would then, we would need to go look at all the other measures, or we would need to see what the average default premium for other companies of similar ratings. Okay. Actually, here's Home Depot, right? We can look at what it looks like. We can go to Standard & Poor's website. Obviously, you got to have a subscription. You got to pay for these things. But you go to Standard & Poor's website. You can look up each different bond issue for Home Depot. We can see that not only can we see the ratings, but we can see what's called the ratings outlook, which is a short write-up by the firm, by the evaluator, saying why they think the rating is X and what they think the outlook will be for the future, how they think the rating might change based on the current financial conditions of the company. So this one says, Moody's affirms the AA3 rating for Home Depot, and they're going to rate these bonds, but they're changing their outlook to negative because Home Depot is making a lot of capital investments. Those capital investments are going to require money, and that money is going to reduce the free cash flow of the firm, which is what's available to cover their interest payments. And so that makes that outlook negative. They're saying they might have to consider downgrading the firm in the future because the risk might get larger over time.